The signal came through at 3 in the morning, ship time. Lieutenant Park was half asleep at his console when the screens lit up with incoming data. He sat up straight and rubbed his eyes. The transmission was weak and broken, but the universal distress code was unmistakable. Someone out there was dying. Commander Laura was in her quarters when the call came. She had been reading old mission reports, unable to sleep as usual. When Park's voice came through the intercom, she was already pulling on her boots. She reached the bridge in under 2 minutes. The crew of the Horizon was small. 47 souls on a patrol vessel that spent most of its time scanning empty space and filing reports that nobody read. They were not soldiers in any real sense. They were watchers, assigned to the outer edges of human territory where nothing ever happened. Until now. Park played the transmission for her. The voice was clicking and buzzing, the sounds of a species struggling to form human words. Between the static and the alien accent could only make out fragments. Attack. Dying, please help us. She knew the voice belonged to a. Humanity had only met them twice, both times at Galactic Assembly meetings, where the older species did most of the talking and humans were expected to sit quietly and learn. They were gentle creatures, known across the galaxy for their medical knowledge and their complete inability to harm another living being. They had evolved on a peaceful world with no predators, and violence was simply not part of their nature. Ordered Park to trace the signal. It came from Prime there, located 3 jumps from human space. She pulled up the star charts and studied the routes. The Horizon could reach them in 18 hours if they pushed the engines hard. She opened a channel to Earth and reported what they had found. The response came within minutes, not from military command but from Ambassador Cole at the Galactic Assembly. Cole was a careful woman who had spent 20 years learning to speak the language of galactic politics. Her message was simple: wait for instructions. Do not act without Assembly approval. Read the message twice. Then she read the distress signal transcript again. They were not asking for a committee meeting. They were asking for help. She called her senior officers to the bridge. There were only 4 of them. Park handled communications. Lieutenant ran the engines. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Hayes managed the weapons systems, such as they were. And Dr. Grace served as the ship's doctor, though she spent most of her time treating minor injuries and common colds. Told them what she knew. An alien species was under attack. They had called for help. Earth wanted them to wait. She asked each of them what they thought she should do. Park spoke first. He said the Assembly would take weeks to reach a decision if they reached one at all. They might be dead by then. Said the Horizon was not a warship and they had no idea what they were flying into. Hayes pointed out that their weapons were designed to scare off pirates, not fight a real battle. Said nothing at first. Then she asked a simple question. If humans were the ones dying, would they come to help them? Nobody had an answer for that, but thought about it. They were pacifists. They could not fight. If humans were under attack, they would probably send doctors and medicine and prayers. They would do everything they could without raising a hand in violence. It was not their way. But it was the human way. Humans had spent thousands of years learning to fight. They had built weapons and armies and strategies for war. They had killed each other over land and resources and ideas. And somewhere along the way, they had also learned to protect those who could not protect themselves. It was an ugly truth that those who knew violence best were often the only ones who could stop it. Made her decision. She ordered to plot a course for Prime. She ordered Hayes to prepare what weapons they had. She ordered to set up the medical bay for casualties. And she ordered Park to send 2 messages. The first message went to Earth. It was short and formal. The Horizon was responding to a distress signal as required by interstellar law. They would report their findings upon arrival. The second message went to Ambassador Cole. It was shorter and less formal. Simply wrote that she understood the political situation and she did not care. People were dying. She was going to help them. The Horizon jumped into hyperspace an hour later. The crew worked in silence, preparing for something none of them fully understood. They were a patrol ship with limited weapons and a small crew, flying toward an unknown enemy to help an alien species they had barely met. Park monitored the communications channels during the journey. More signals came through, each one weaker than the last. They were broadcasting to anyone who would listen. Their cities were burning. Their people were being taken. They did not understand why this was happening. They had never harmed anyone. Listened to every transmission. She heard the fear in those alien voices, the confusion of a peaceful people facing violence for the first time. She heard children crying and elders praying and young asking if help was coming. She could not promise them anything. The horizon was one small ship against an unknown threat. They might arrive too late. They might arrive and be destroyed immediately. They might make no difference at all. But they were going anyway, because someone had called for help and humans had heard them. The final jump brought them to the edge of space, stood on the bridge and watched as the stars returned to normal. What she saw made her blood run cold. Prime hung in space ahead of them, but it was not the peaceful blue-green world she had seen in the database images. Smoke rose from the surface in great columns. Ships of unfamiliar design surrounded the planet, massive vessels covered in sharp angles and dark metal. And descending toward the surface were hundreds of smaller craft, moving toward the cities below like vultures circling a wounded animal. Gripped the armrest of her chair. Behind her, Park whispered something that might have been a prayer. Hayes reported that his weapons were online for whatever good they would do. Stood frozen, staring at the destruction on the screen. They had called for help. Humanity had answered, but looking at the nightmare before her, wondered if they had come only to die alongside them. She opened a channel to Earth. Her voice was steady despite the fear in her chest. She spoke 3 sentences that would change the course of galactic history. We have arrived at Prime. The situation is worse than we imagined. We need everything you have. The enemy called themselves the Dominion. Commander learned their name from intercepted communications as the horizon drifted at the edge of the system, hidden behind a small moon. They were conquerors, and they had been conquering for longer than humanity had existed as a species. They moved from world to world, taking what they wanted and destroying what they did not need. What they wanted from them was biological material. The gentle species possessed unique genetic structures that they used for their own purposes. They were not interested in trade or diplomacy. They simply took, and with no weapons and no warriors, could do nothing to stop them. Watched the harvesting ships descend on the planet below. That was what they called them, harvesting ships, as if the millions of living beings on the surface were nothing more than crops to be gathered. She felt sick to her stomach, but she could not look away. Lieutenant Park picked up transmissions from the surface. They were still broadcasting, their voices growing more desperate by the hour. One signal came through clearer than the others. It belonged to Elder, one of the highest-ranking members of society. The Elder spoke in broken but understandable human language, learned from diplomatic exchanges years ago. "We do not understand," said. "We have given no offense. We have harmed no one. Why do they hurt us? Why does no one answer our calls?" Wanted to respond. She wanted to tell that someone had heard them, that help was coming. But revealing their position would bring the down on them instantly. The horizon would be destroyed in seconds, and then there would be no one left to carry word back to Earth. She made the hardest decision of her life. She ordered Park to record everything but transmit nothing. They would be witnesses, gathering evidence for the galaxy to see. It was not enough, but it was all they could do. Doctor stood beside her on the bridge, watching the same nightmare unfold. The doctor had spent her career saving lives. Now she was watching lives end by the thousands, and she could not help any of them. Tears ran down her face, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "We cannot just watch," she said. "We have to do something." Agreed. But what could one patrol ship do against a fleet of warships? She studied the tactical display, looking for any weakness, any opportunity. The vessels were enormous, bristling with weapons that could tear the horizon apart with a single shot. Their smaller craft numbered in the hundreds, each one carrying soldiers and equipment for the harvest below. Then she saw it, a gap in their formation near the southern continent where a large group had gathered. The refugees were fleeing toward the coast, thousands of them moving slowly across open ground. A harvesting ship was descending toward them, preparing to collect its cargo. The horizon was fast. Their weapons were weak, but their engines were built for speed. If they moved quickly, they could reach the harvesting ship before it landed. They could buy the refugees time to escape. It might cost them their lives, but it would save others. Looked at her crew. These were not soldiers. They were technicians and officers and a doctor who had signed up for quiet patrol duty. None of them had expected to fight. None of them had expected to die in battle. But when she told them her plan, not one of them hesitated. Hayes powered up the weapons, pushed the engines to full. Park opened a channel to broadcast their presence, drawing attention away from the refugees, prepared the medical bay for whatever came next. The horizon shot out from behind the moon like a bullet. Warning sirens screamed as sensors detected them. Enemy ships began turning toward the small human vessel, their weapons charging. Ignored them. Her eyes were fixed on the harvesting ship ahead. They reached it just as it was beginning its descent. Hayes fired everything they had, pouring energy into the massive vessel's hull. The weapons were not strong enough to destroy it, but they were enough to hurt it. The harvesting ship lurched and pulled away, its landing sequence interrupted. On the ground below, thousands of looked up and saw a human ship fighting for them. They did not know who these strangers were or why they had come, but they understood that someone was trying to save them. They ran faster, pushing toward the coast where they might find shelter. The response was immediate and brutal. 3 warships closed on the horizon, their weapons tearing into the small vessel. The shields failed almost instantly. Explosions rocked the hull as compartments decompressed and systems overloaded. Was thrown from her chair as the bridge filled with smoke and sparks. But the horizon kept fighting. Somehow kept the engines running despite the damage. Hayes continued firing even as his console burned around him. Park broadcast the attack to the entire galaxy, sending images of the fleet and the burning planet and the small human ship that dared to stand against them. The battle lasted 7 minutes. When it was over, the horizon was crippled but still alive. They had pulled back, confused by this tiny ship that refused to die. They had never encountered anything like it. The species they conquered always surrendered or fled. This one fought knowing it could not win. Pulled herself up from the deck. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, and she was fairly certain she had broken ribs. Around her, the bridge was a ruin of shattered screens and sparking wires, but Park was still at his station, and his console was still working. "Send the message," she said. "Send it to Earth. Send it everywhere." Park nodded and began transmitting. The message contained everything they had recorded: the fleet, the harvesting ships, the dying planet, and the final words of Elder broadcast just moments ago to anyone who would listen. "Please," the Elder had said, "we cannot fight. We have never learned how. But someone must stop this. Someone must care that we are dying. Is there no one in this vast galaxy who will stand for those who cannot stand for themselves?" Recorded her own message to attach to the transmission. Her voice was rough with pain and exhaustion, but her words were clear. "This is Commander Laura of the human vessel Horizon. We have engaged the Dominion at Prime. We are damaged but still operational. They are dying by the millions. The Galactic Assembly has done nothing. We need reinforcements immediately. We need every ship Earth can send. These people called for help and we answered. Now I am calling for help. Do not let us fight alone." She ended the transmission and looked at her crew. They were battered and bloody. Their ship was falling apart around them, and they were surrounded by enemies who could destroy them at any moment. But they were still alive, and somewhere out there humanity had heard them. The transmission from the horizon reached Earth at exactly 6 in the morning local time at the capital. Within an hour, it had spread to every corner of human space. People woke to images of a burning world and the sound of an alien elder begging for help. They saw the small patrol ship fighting against impossible odds. They heard Commander calling for reinforcements. Admiral Frank was in his office when the message arrived. He was an old man who had spent 40 years in the fleet, rising through the ranks during an era of peace and quiet expansion. He had never commanded ships in real combat. None of them had. Humanity had joined the galactic community as a junior member, expected to learn and grow slowly under the guidance of elder species. But had studied history. He knew what humans were capable of when pushed. He watched the footage from Prime 3 times, his face growing harder with each viewing. Then he called an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. Senator Wright chaired the council. She was a politician who had built her career on careful compromise and measured words. She had never imagined she would face a decision like this. The Galactic Assembly had already sent their recommendation. Do not interfere. The Dominion was too powerful, too dangerous. Humanity should protect itself and let them face their fate alone. Wright read the Assembly message aloud to the Council. Then she played the transmission from one more time. The room was silent as they watched a dying planet and heard a dying people cry for help. The debate lasted less than an hour. Some argued for caution. They said humanity was not ready for a war against a superior enemy. They said the Assembly would punish them for acting without approval. They said the smart thing to do was nothing. Listened to all of it, then he stood and spoke. I have been a soldier for 4 decades, he said. I have trained for war my entire life, hoping I would never have to fight one. I watched that footage and I saw children being taken from their parents. I saw cities burning. I saw an entire species being erased because no one would stand up for them. If we do nothing, we are not protecting ourselves. We are becoming the kind of people who watch evil happen and turn away. I would rather die fighting than live as a coward. Wright called for a vote. It was unanimous. Humanity would respond. The mobilization began within hours. Every available warship received orders to assemble at the staging point. The fleet was not large by galactic standards, but it was everything humanity had. Cruisers and destroyers and carriers, some of them still undergoing repairs, all of them called to duty. Colonel Sam Torres commanded the Orbital Drop Marines, the closest thing humanity had to elite soldiers. His people trained for boarding actions and planetary assault, skills that had never been tested in real combat. When he received the deployment order, he gathered his troops and told them the truth. We are going to fight an enemy we have never faced, he said. We do not know their tactics or their weaknesses. We do not know if we can win, but we know why we are fighting. There are innocent people dying, and we are the only ones willing to help them. That is enough for me. I hope it is enough for you. Not a single Marine refused the mission. Across human space, the response was the same. Warships that had been scheduled for maintenance launched early with crews working around the clock to finish repairs in transit. Reserve officers were called back to duty. Training exercises were canceled. Everything focused on one goal: get to Prime as fast as possible. Civilian ships volunteered as well. Freighters and transports offered to carry supplies and evacuate refugees. Medical vessels prepared to treat casualties. Even private yachts and mining ships showed up at the staging point, their owners asking what they could do to help. Looked at the fleet assembling before him and felt something he had not felt in years: pride. These were not professional killers or heartless warriors. They were ordinary people who had seen something terrible and decided they could not ignore it. They were afraid, all of them, but they were going anyway. The Galactic Assembly sent another message as the fleet prepared to depart. This one was more urgent than the last. They warned that humanity was making a grave mistake. They would not forgive this interference. By attacking them, humanity was painting a target on their own worlds. The elder species urged them to reconsider. Senator Wright drafted the official response. She kept it short. We have received your concerns and understand the risks. Humanity has made its decision. When innocent lives are at stake, we do not stand aside. We do not wait for permission. We do not calculate the cost to ourselves before acting. This is who we are. If the galaxy does not understand that yet, they will understand it soon. The fleet jumped to hyperspace 18 hours after its transmission arrived. 237 warships, 42 support vessels, and thousands of soldiers and crew. It was the largest military operation in human history, launched not for territory or resources or revenge, but because someone had asked for help. Stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the stars blur around them. He thought about the gentle creatures who had never learned to fight. He thought about the brutal conquerors who had never been challenged. He thought about his own people, young and inexperienced and possibly flying to their deaths. But mostly he thought about Commander and her tiny patrol ship, still holding position at Prime, still sending updates, still refusing to run. She had been the first to respond. Now the rest of humanity was following her lead. The fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system, looked at the tactical display and saw what it had seen. The Armada, hundreds of ships strong, surrounding a burning planet. The harvesting operations continuing despite the crippled human vessel that had dared to interfere. He opened a channel to his fleet. His voice was calm and steady. All ships, this is Admiral, you know why we are here. You know what we are facing. The enemy believes we are weak. They believe we will break and run when we see their numbers. They are wrong. Today we show the galaxy what humanity is made of. All ships, weapons free. Engage the enemy. The human fleet surged forward, and the battle for Prime began. They had never seen anything like it. For thousands of years they had conquered species after species, harvesting the weak and destroying the resistant. Every civilization they encountered followed the same pattern. First came fear, then came negotiation, then came surrender. The strong took from the weak. That was the natural order of things. But these humans did not surrender. They did not negotiate. They came out of hyperspace with weapons already firing, and they did not stop. Admiral had studied every report he could find about tactics during the journey. They were predictable, he realized. They relied on overwhelming force and the psychological impact of their massive ships. They expected enemies to be intimidated, to fall back, to look for escape routes. They were not prepared for an opponent who charged straight at them. The human fleet hit the formation like a hammer. Smaller and faster than the enemy vessels, the human ships darted between the massive warships, targeting engines and weapon systems with precise strikes. They fought in groups of 3, covering each other, communicating constantly, adapting to every response. Watch from his flagship as his captains executed maneuvers they had only practiced in simulations. They were not perfect. Ships were lost in the first minutes of battle, bright flashes marking the deaths of crews who had been alive seconds before. But for every human ship destroyed, 2 vessels were crippled or disabled. The commander broadcast a message to the human fleet. His voice was deep and filled with contempt. "You are insects," he said. "You sting us, but you cannot hurt us. Withdraw now and we will allow you to leave. Continue this foolishness and we will harvest your worlds next." Did not respond with words. He responded by ordering his ships to focus fire on the command vessel. 30 human ships targeted the massive flagship simultaneously, pouring energy into its shields until they collapsed. The ship did not explode, but it went dark, its systems overloaded by the sustained assault. The fleet hesitated. They had never lost a flagship before. They had never faced an enemy that targeted commanders rather than following the proper rules of engagement. Colonel Torres saw his opportunity. His Marines had been waiting in their dropships, ready for the signal. Now he gave the order to launch. 200 dropships screamed toward the harvesting vessels still operating in the planet's atmosphere, carrying soldiers trained for exactly this kind of close combat. They did not use ground troops. They did not need them. Their victims never resisted. So when human Marines crashed through the airlocks of harvesting ships and began fighting hand to hand, the crews had no idea how to respond. Torres led the assault on the largest harvesting vessel personally. He and his team cut through the outer hull with breaching charges and dropped into a corridor filled with soldiers. The aliens were larger than humans, their bodies covered in natural armor, their claws capable of tearing through metal. But they had never fought an enemy face to face. They did not understand tactics or cover or coordinated movement. They charged at the humans individually, relying on size and strength. The Marines cut them down. They moved through the ship like ghosts, covering corners, communicating with hand signals, never presenting easy targets. Torres lost 11 soldiers taking that ship. They killed over 200. When they reached the cargo holds, Torres understood why they had come. Thousands of were packed into metal containers, barely able to move, waiting to be processed. Some were already dead. Others were too weak to stand. The living looked at the human soldiers with compound eyes that could not produce tears but somehow still showed hope. Torres opened a channel to the fleet. His voice was shaking with rage. "We found them," he said. "We found the survivors. Get medical teams down here now, and tell to burn every one of these ships out of the sky." On the surface of Prime, the tide was turning. Ground operations had collapsed as their harvesting ships were captured or destroyed. Human Marines established defensive positions around refugee camps, forming protective rings around the surviving. Dr. Grace had transferred from the crippled Horizon to a medical frigate. She worked without rest, treating wounded alongside human doctors who had never seen alien anatomy before. They made mistakes. They lost patients, but they saved more than they lost, learning as they went, refusing to give up. The commander who had replaced the fallen flagship officer broadcast another message. This one was different. There was fear in his voice now. "This is not worth the cost," he said. "We will withdraw. Let us leave and this ends." Considered the offer. His fleet was taking losses. Every minute of fighting cost more lives. The smart thing to do would be to accept the surrender and let the retreat. But he thought about the cargo holds full of captured. He thought about the cities burned and the millions already dead. He thought about what would happen if they left now and came back later, targeting some other helpless species. He opened a broadcast channel, not just to the fleet but to the entire galaxy. Every species with receivers heard what he said next. "Commander of the Horizon recorded everything you did here. The harvesting, the killing. The cargo holds full of living beings treated like raw material. That footage has been sent to every corner of known space. Everyone knows what you are now. Everyone knows what you do. And I want to make something very clear to you and to anyone else who might think about doing the same thing. Humanity does not negotiate with monsters. We do not let you retreat to prey on someone else. You came here to harvest innocent people. Now you will face the consequences." He ended the transmission and gave the order. The human fleet closed in on the remaining ships. The battle continued until none of them could fight any longer. The last vessel surrendered 4 hours later. Its commander begged for mercy, promising anything if the humans would spare them, accepted the surrender but made no promises. The prisoners would face justice for what they had done. When it was over, sat alone in his quarters and looked at the casualty reports. 38 human ships destroyed, over 4,000 dead, good people who had followed him into battle knowing they might not come back. He told himself it was worth it. He had to believe that, because if it was not worth it, then nothing was. Outside his window, Prime still burned in places, but the harvesting ships were gone. The fleet was shattered. And somewhere down on that wounded world, survivors were looking up at a sky that no longer held their executioners. Humanity had come when they called, and humanity had delivered vengeance upon those who had hurt them. The galaxy had watched everything. Every species with access to communications networks had seen the footage from Prime. They had seen the harvesting ships descending on cities. They had seen a single human patrol vessel charge into battle against impossible odds. They had seen the human fleet arrive and fight with a fury that shocked observers across known space. Now they watched the aftermath. They watched human ships rescue survivors from cargo holds. They watched human doctors treat wounded. They watched human soldiers stand guard over refugee camps, protecting people they had never met from an enemy that no longer existed. And they asked themselves a question that would change everything. What kind of species does this? Elder addressed the Galactic Assembly 2 weeks after the battle ended. The old had survived, though many of those close to him had not. He stood before representatives of 100 species and spoke in a voice that trembled with emotion but did not break. "My people called for help," he said. "We broadcast our suffering to the stars, begging anyone to hear us. Most of you heard. Most of you did nothing. You calculated the risks. You weighed the costs. You decided that our lives were not worth the trouble." He paused and looked around the chamber. Some representatives met his gaze. Others looked away. "One species answered us," continued. "Humans. Young, inexperienced, dismissed by many of you as barbarians barely worthy of membership in this assembly. They came knowing they might die. They fought knowing they could lose. They bled for us because we asked for help, and they believed that was enough reason to give it." The elder turned to face the human delegation. Ambassador Cole sat among them, her face carefully neutral but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I do not have words sufficient to thank you," said, "but I will spend the rest of my life trying to find them. My people owe you everything. The galaxy owes you a debt it has not yet recognized. You showed us all what courage looks like, what compassion looks like, what true strength looks like. It is not the power to destroy. It is the will to protect." Cole rose to respond. She had prepared remarks, careful diplomatic language approved by committees and advisors. She set those notes aside and spoke from her heart instead. "We did not come for gratitude," she said. "We did not come for recognition or reward. We came because people were dying and we could help. That is all the reason humans have ever needed. We are not better than other species. We are not wiser or stronger or more advanced. But when innocents suffer, we act. When the helpless cry out, we answer. This is not policy. It is not strategy. It is simply who we are." She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. The Dominion believed they could take whatever they wanted because no one would stop them. They were wrong, and I want every other species that preys on the weak to understand something clearly. If you hurt innocent people, we will come for you. It does not matter how powerful you are. It does not matter how far away you hide. Humanity will find you, and humanity will make you answer for what you have done. The chamber was silent. No one had ever spoken to the assembly this way. The elder species had maintained order through negotiation and balance of power, carefully avoiding direct confrontation. The humans had just announced a different approach entirely. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to change. The Dominion, shattered and humiliated, sent formal surrender terms to Earth. They agreed to release all captured individuals from previous harvests. They agreed to pay reparations to species they had victimized. They agreed to submit to monitoring of their activities. And they did all of this because they were terrified of what humanity would do if they refused. Other species began reaching out to humanity as well. Small civilizations that had lived in fear of larger neighbors. Peaceful peoples who had never developed weapons of their own. Victims of oppression who had given up hope of rescue. They saw what humans had done for them, and they wondered if humanity might help them too. Received a promotion he did not want, and a medal he did not care about. He spent most of his time writing letters to the families of soldiers who had died under his command. Each letter was personal, specific, acknowledging the individual sacrifice of people he had ordered into battle. Colonel Torres returned to training, preparing his Marines for conflicts that now seemed inevitable. Humanity had made powerful enemies by standing against them. Other predator species would test them. He wanted his people ready. Doctor stayed on Prime for 6 months, helping rebuild the medical infrastructure that had been destroyed. She trained doctors in human techniques and learned their methods in return. By the time she left, she had delivered 17 bobbies, the first new generation born after the attack. Commander was offered command of a battleship. She turned it down and asked to keep the Horizon instead. The little patrol ship had been repaired and upgraded, its hull still bearing scars from the battle. Like those scars, they reminded her of what they had survived. 1 year after the battle, she returned to Prime for a memorial ceremony. They had built a monument to the humans who had died defending them. 4,000 names carved in stone, surrounded by gardens that bloomed in colors humans could barely perceive. Walked through the gardens alone, reading names she recognized. Good people who had followed her into the unknown because she asked them to. She wondered sometimes if she had done the right thing, charging into battle without orders, starting a chain of events that led to so much death. Then she felt a small hand take hers. She looked down and saw a child, barely old enough to walk, staring up at her with huge compound eyes. The child did not speak human language yet, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you." Knelt down and held the child carefully, feeling the delicate wings folded against its back, the warmth of a life that existed because humans had fought for it. This was why they had come. This was what they had protected. Not territory or resources or political advantage. Just this, the chance for innocent beings to live. She thought about the galaxy watching humanity now. Some feared them. Some admired them. Some still dismissed them as young and reckless. None of them fully understood them. Humans were not perfect. They had their own history of violence and cruelty, their own failures and mistakes. But somewhere in their complicated nature was something precious. A refusal to look away from suffering. A compulsion to help those who could not help themselves. A fury that burned hot when innocents were harmed. They had called for help. Humanity had answered with everything they had, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy what kind of species they truly were. Not conquerors, not barbarians, not the young fools the elder species had assumed. Protectors, defenders, the ones who came when you called. The universe was vast and dark and full of dangers, but now every species in the galaxy knew something important. If you were innocent and afraid and crying out for help, you were not alone. Humanity would come for you, and they would bring vengeance upon those who had hurt you.